During a recent visit to Australia, I happened to interact with 3 young people of South African mixed race descent who mentioned to me that they felt like they did not belong either in South African or Australian society. In short, they did not know where they fit in. And as a result, I decided to create this podcast. Hi, my name is Crystal Montier Richards. I am a life skills coach and neuro-linguistics practitioner. The podcast is called Just Deal With It because I am of the opinion that if you do not deal with your issues will deal with you. I hope that this podcast will go on to create a platform where people can discuss issues that are relevant to them. I would furthermore like to add a disclaimer that I have not studied sociology. I have studied industrial psychology. The opinions which I voice in the podcast come from my lived experience as a colored woman living in South Africa for 60 odd years.
No way.
Tell us a bit about your profession and how long you've been in that profession, and also obviously your name to first, and why you are interested in being a part of this project.
So my name is Heidi van Rooyen. I trained as a psychologist many years ago, nearly 30 years ago, I think, and but I haven't really worked as one, in the sense that I didn't go into clinical practice and so on. But of course, psychology has shaped quite a lot of how I see the world and my work. And so my work has mostly been in research. I'm a researcher, and I've researched and looked at all kinds of issues from mostly around HIV, community-based responses to HIV, COVID. I'm interested in issues of gender and sexuality, and I've come to issues around. I'm also interested in issues around race and identity. I have been exploring in the last while this emerging space, which is the use of poetry in research. I'm a poet, and I actually prefer the label as a poet researcher. So this use of how do we use poetry in research to make sense of the issues we're interested in. So it kind of was like a full circle moment, coming across this emerging new field. And at the time I was exploring and looking at issues around race and gender and sexuality and identity. And so I've used poetry as a mechanism, as a tool, as a method to try and understand those issues and those topics. So my writings are about myself, my own experience, and it also reflects on the bigger kind of culture, the bigger issues in society. So I kind of play between both trying to understand the bigger issues, but also using myself and my own experience as a reference or as a starting point. And I've been doing that I've been a researcher now for a long time, 20 odd years, and in the space of poetry and using poetry in research, the last 10 or so.
Wow, that's an extensive, an amazing background with a lot of experience, and I love that you're able to use those tools to be able to, explore your own experiences and others, and that's absolutely amazing. Definitely excited to delve into that for sure. Crystal, would you like to introduce yourself and a bit of your experiences? I know a lot about those experiences, but if you want to just say a few things about, your sort of background, what you're looking to do, what you're currently doing, and why you're excited to be a part of this project.
So, I spent about 7 months in Australia recently, and in my first 2 weeks there, I came across 3 young Australians of South African coloured origin, and each of them shared with me their feelings of alienation from the larger coloured populations. Like, what does it actually mean to be a coloured?
Crystal, you're a little soft. Can you either just speak closer to the microphone, or you keep on dipping in and out for me?
I think I'll come closer. Yeah, right.
That's better.
So these young people kind of events, they spoke about the fact that they don't really feel like they fit in anywhere. And at the time, one of my old friends' son-in-law had just committed suicide. And so I guess that kind of, compelled me to get into this space and to start talking about, well, what does identity mean? I'm not saying that the young man that committed suicide did it because of identity, but I'm saying that just raise some real red flags for me to know, well, if you don't fit in somewhere, if you don't identify somewhere with a group of people, how does that actually color your whole life? So I'm a life coach now, and I'm hoping that in my podcast and all the other content that I'm going to embark upon, that I'll be able to assist people in the wellness space. Just get together, know who you are, and work within your own space as a person. Yeah, that's me. Annie?
Thank you so much. So if you guys don't mind, you could just switch your microphones off. If you forget, sometimes that's okay, but just in case. Thank you. Annie,
So
would you
hi
like?
guys, my name is Annie. I'm a clinical psychologist and I've been a psychologist for about 20 years now. And I qualified in South Africa and then moved to New Zealand about 15 years ago. So I've spent most of my time in my field away from home. And I think that's been an interesting journey coming as a colored person to a country where there's a lot of people that are mixed race, which is interesting. But the Maori people, they're very interesting because a lot of them can trace back their ancestors for at least 3 to 6 generations back, which is something that we can't do. And I've seen how they've got so much pride in the fact that they can name where they come from, the land they come from, the names of who they are and where their land is. And for me, that's never been something that we could actually do. So I think with that is an aspect that we carry trauma, I think. And I think we carry an aspect of we're not sure where we fit in because we know that we're mixed, but how the mixes have come about becomes an issue for us. And so I'm interested in this topic and thank you guys for, that I could be part of this topic. I think it's going to be an interesting thing for us to delve into and talk about. Yeah. Thanks, Crystal, and thanks, Ra. Nice to meet you, Ra.
Yeah, nice to meet you all, and thank you guys all. Like, as Crystal says, yeah, thank you guys for participating. It's really exciting that you guys are all coming from such awesome professional backgrounds, and it's so exciting to meet colored people who have these types of professions. Because even for myself, I feel like I haven't met color people that are in these types of roles before. I mean, I just know of color people doing like male coloreds in my family of doing like mechanical fitters and welders and these types of like trades, but coming from this type of field is something new to me too. So I'm like, what? And women as well. So this is exciting for me to see this and hear this and having this type of discussion, because I think a lot of people don't know this about our culture too. They don't expect it, and people from our own race to have no idea what it's like to, or didn't know that we could have so much success like this. So I think that's really exciting. So I think that first of all, we did touch on it in the last episode about what a colored is, and I think that it'd be also really good to have that understanding further of what that is. If any of you wanted to or felt comfortable with explaining how you know being a coloured is, or even if it can come from a political standpoint or whatever it is, personal, whatever. Whoever is keen to speak on that and touch on that, that'd be amazing, because the more perspectives and understanding of that for the viewer is great.
I'm happy to kick off, and maybe I'll just as a start and warm up into the conversation, just read two things I wrote about colouredness and its beginnings, and I think it taps into some of the issues you've raised, Annie. So I'll start with those and then say a few things and kick that over. Is that all right? If that's all right. So in about 1983, First Lady Marieke de Klerk, who was then President de Klerk's wife, had this to say about coloureds. Coloureds are a negative group, someone who is not black, not white, and also not an Indian. In other words, a non-person. The leftovers. The people who were left after the nations were sorted out. They are the rest, the leftovers. The people who were left after the nations were sorted out. They are the rest. And then this other little piece, also along similar lines, which are called God's stepchildren. No matter how respectable we become, or our achievements, the taint of that original sin remains entrenched. We are reminded how early colonists plucked vagrant coloured women off the beach, tossed them in their kitchens as slaves, and fucked them like beasts to produce us, half-caste bastards. Physically stunted, defective, lacking in endurance, prone to dishonesty, licentiousness, and drink. We are God's stepchildren. Physically stunted, defective, lacking in endurance, prone to dishonesty, licentiousness, and drink. We are God's stepchildren. So a lot of that early kind of writing about this group, about coloredness, and Annie, it goes to some of your points around there isn't a similar sense of pride in our heritage and our background, right? There's a sense in which this identity was fabricated, was constructed. We don't have a long lineage or a sense of where we came from. It was kind of, in many ways, a created identity, fabricated through these relationships between white and black, illicit shame kind of associating some of those beginnings. And I think that shame, you talk about it as trauma, that shame lingers on in terms of it rests somewhere in our bodies. Those early beginnings in how we came into being, it rests somewhere, I think, still in our bodies, and still exists. And there are many ways in which I think if you are colored, you've tried to make sense of those beginnings. These white forefathers coming in, plundering, taking over land and taking over women and their bodies. And that's who we are. We're the product of that. So there are many ways in which I think people have tried to make sense of that. And we can talk about that more as it goes on. But it feels like coloredness is associated with shame from those very, very early beginnings. And I think it's something we have to constantly be reckoning with. And what happens then when you go to another place, another context? Where does that shame go? Where does that shame rest in your body? What does it mean to be colored in New Zealand or Australia or in the US? You know, how do we take those parts of us forward? So, yeah, those are just some of my beginning thoughts.
I think your poems really captured a lot of our trauma and shame and the sadness in the poetry, you know, and also the aspect of being a woman that is not white, being brown woman, and being a product of rape, or our great-grandmothers were misused and mistreated. And so it's interesting because when people ask you, so where do you come from? A lot of us tend to name the surnames that our fathers got from the white man, the Scotsman, the British, but then we sort of don't know much else about these men because they did not take these women as wives. They still had their white wives, and our fathers and grandfathers were not left with any sense of land or wealth. And even if they were, you then bring in the apartheid system where we had so much land and homes taken from us. So there's a lot of theft, there's a lot of anger, I think, that sits within us too, because we can't go back to the land that we come from, but we also didn't get any sense of land, homes, wealth. So if we talk about trauma, we also have to look at anger and what was displaced from us, how we were displaced, and how our land was dispossessed from us. So it's deeper than the color of our skin. I think it's got to do with what was taken from us in terms of a sense of this is where we come from, this is our land, this is what we own, this is what we can pass down to our children's children. And a lot of our land was not, we still haven't got the land back. Now, if you look at here, a lot of the land was given back. So we don't have land, so we don't have wealth. And if we don't have wealth, a lot of us don't have a sense of pride. So when you ask the question and that aspect of being told, oh, these people just like to drink, these people are lazy, they don't want to work. If you look in the Cape, a lot of our men were paid with wine. They were not paid in terms of cash, they were paid in terms of wine. A lot of the men were taken away from their wives to go and work away from their families. And so the families would, there was no father in the families. And when you don't have a father in the home, that also brings a lot of issues. So it's a very deep topic, and I think it's a lot of things that we can delve into in terms of shame and guilt and sadness and anger and being poor, and it's exceptionally deep topic. And I think for us to heal, it's good for us to look back at the past, but it's also important for us to move forward. But how do we move forward? And what do we say to our children that are born in a land away from where we come from, and what are the things that we get to teach them about their fathers and their forefathers if we don't even know those questions ourselves, if we don't even have the answers for ourselves? What is the thing that we're teaching our children?
And I think a lot of what you guys had spoken about also could not I don't want to say boiled down, because that kind of just sort of dumbs down like everybody's experiences and feelings, but if you were to just maybe use one word in particular that could sort of trying to grasp, allow people to understand, sort of a feeling that colored people could feel, is sort of the sense of belonging or not belonging. Crystal, I'm not in psychology. I have really no idea about it. But just from very, very simple research, I'm led to believe anyway that there's four types of belonging. I'm not sure if you guys can verify this. It could be these four levels of belonging, maybe intimate, personal, and social and public. I don't know if maybe if Crystal or if anybody wants to interject in regards to those four levels of belonging. I don't know if that's something that maybe you guys can sort of expand on, of how colored people are missing that, or how even within yourself that of people aren't having those levels of comfort being met.
Would you please repeat those levels again?
I mean, can I verify that if that is true, that there's a sort of those aspects or concepts within psychology?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, just list them again. Intimate.
The four levels of belonging are intimate, personal, social, and public. With those aspects in mind, how are colored people lacking those simple or like sort of like standards of concepts within our community or within self. Does anybody, maybe
Yeah,
Crystal, I don't know
Crystal, if you want to
from your
go,
experience.
I'm happy to go after you. Crystal?
Well, in the first podcast that we did with Rai and his other cousin, um, from a social a grouping aspect as colored people in South Africa, these young people wanted to know, well, do we basically have a culture? That they can say they belong to this culture. And I said, well, it's for me, it's informed by where you grew up in South Africa. For example, Annie has lived all her life before she went to New Zealand in Johannesburg. In Johannesburg, predominantly Afrikaans speaking, different to us, Heidi and I, that grew up in exactly the same township in Durban, English speaking. Very strong Indian influence in our, in our grouping. But I think that because Ra's parents' mother also comes from the same community as Heidi and I, right? And so I don't know if other people in other so-called colored townships experience the sense of community that we did in Wentworth. For me, there's a very strong sense of community. If you come from Wentworth, you know you belong there. And so there's that aspect of I do belong somewhere. And then Ra knows this from our family. We have a very strong sense of belonging to our families. So I think those two things in our families and in our communities as people from Wentworth, those two things are met, of belonging somewhere. But from a public perspective, that may be where there's a problem. Because Ra, you were saying when people look at you, they don't know who you are, and you want that. Person looks at a Chinese person, well, not so much now because there's Koreans, there's Japanese, all those people look similar, but they're not the same, I know this. You want a person to look at you and say that's who you are. Now look at the four of us that are sitting here. We are all colored. How differently do we all present? Just depends on the genetic background that we have. And so for me, it's not an issue. I'm of the opinion, it doesn't matter to me how other people view me. It only matters to me how I view me. So I don't have an issue with you don't know what I am, because like Annie was with me when my first trip to New Zealand, when they were asking me what's my whakapapa, which means which tribe of Maori do I belong to. And they were quite taken aback when I said I am not a Maori. And again, wherever I am in the world, people think I'm a local because I have this mixture that makes me a local. I don't know. So I'm not fazed by the fact that other people don't recognize who I am. And that may be it might just be because of where I come from and how I was raised and what I've taught myself over the years to overcome that feeling of, well, I don't belong anywhere. Because I know I belong to all of you as you're sitting here. Do you know? Okay, Annie,
Yeah.
how's your reaction?
Yeah. I mean,
I think Heidi, you said you wanted to add something.
yeah, so I think it's the issue of identity and belonging is complicated, right? And there are many aspects to it. Some of those aspects you pull out in your 4 concepts or ideas there. We all have to figure out, as you're saying, Crystal, we all have to figure out what is our place in the world, right? So who do I belong to? My family, my relationship, my broader kind of culture, community. That's that ongoing work. And it is very much, I think, individual work. It's figuring out who am I in the midst of all of this? To who and what do I belong? And that issue of identity, it's never stable. So for me, there's also issues around my queer identity. There's issues around my race. And at different points in my life, some of those things have taken on bigger significance than at other times. But this issue of coloredness, I think, is something we all have to navigate. So, for example, in my family, I'm one of the lighter skinned. So there's, as Crystal points out, all of us look so different here. And so I had to rest with and work with for myself, intimately and personally, what does it mean to be colored? And there's something about this identity that is in between. Often it's neither this nor that. You're neither black nor white. You're somewhere in between. Part of how you deal with this in-between status is in one of two ways. So a lot of what we did to survive under apartheid, and maybe we still do, is to try and assimilate or become white. So if you ask colored people who are your forebearers, they're not going to go to their African grandmother. They're going to go to that forefather, white forefather from Holland who raped the great-grandmother. You're going to remember the whiteness, and you're not going to remember that part of you that is black. And so in contemporary South Africa, those are some of the big issues. The feeling of then we didn't belong, we were neither here, we were neither there. Where do I fit? Where do I belong? Now, and for blackness has always viewed coloredness with suspicion, because they could see how in order for us to get ahead, we assimilated and we became like the master to get on and not to be kind of given the same treatment that black people were given. And so for me, I have to deal with my own identity and what is my relative privilege. Is there something about the color of the skin that has allowed me to advance more in my field, more than my family has? And so there's some shame in the sense in which I've left them and I've gone and done all these things. And is it because of the color of my skin? Because I'm lighter than some of the others? Has it opened more doors? Has it given me more privilege and more access? So I think I'm saying this because it's complicated. And I think the work, before we get to the future, the work for all of us is wrestling with our complexities and our contradictions. And in the world of these hierarchies in South Africa, I've most certainly been disadvantaged as a colored person. But yet in the skin that I inhabit, in my family, I've had privilege that maybe some others haven't had, because my skin happens to be lighter than some of theirs. So identity it's complex, and it's figuring out in all of this what makes sense, where's my place, what are my contradictions, how do I hold those contradictions?
I'm thinking about so many things as you're both talking. I was a first-year university student in 1994, and that happened to be the same year that we could vote. And I was at Wits, so Wits was a so-called white university until around 90-something. And I went in as a student for the first time because the schools that we went to, we only saw everyone look like us. So for the first time, I'm going to a place where everyone's all mixed. But the white people hung out with the white people, the black people hung out with the black people, the Indians hung out with the Indians, and the coloreds hung out with the coloreds. But my peers that looked like me, they were not going to class. They were playing cards when they're supposed to be in class. And I looked at the situation and I said to myself, my parents didn't even get to finish school. They sacrificed for me to go to university. And if I feel like I need to fit in, then I'm going to be bunking lectures and hanging out with these people who are losers. Why do I need to do that? Just so I can fit in. And that same year in our course, we were also taught, imagine I am a student and I'm learning in the textbook what it means to be a colored person. And they said something like, if you hate the white part of you, or if you hate the black part of you, then you're hating a part of yourself. So I thought, okay, so I'm both and, so I don't have to be either or. And then there was this thing of, but where do I fit in? So for a long time, I didn't have a group that I hung out with. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to hang out with these people that are playing cards. And I don't fit in any of the other groups. So I'll just see if I can make a friend here and a friend there and a friend there. And I ended up doing that. And it was interesting. I purposely didn't want to have a clique because the church that I also came from was mixed since I was a teenager. So the church was different, but the home was different, and the school looked different to the church. But at church, I was always taught that I'm God's child. It doesn't matter if I'm black and white, and God sees me as the same. and I've got the same worth like the white children. So I always knew that who I am has got nothing to do with my skin. And so I think that sense of good self-esteem, a positive self-esteem, came from the church and came from an aspect of, if you want to get even, not get even, maybe that's a different word. If you want to prove the white person wrong, that you are less than, then you have to study. Because when you study, you become equal. And you can actually even those fields that are unequal. You can actually go back to getting back to some sense of wealth, some sense of being fine with who you are, and you don't have to fit in with one particular group. So when anyone asks me who I am, I first say I am South African, and then I'm Christian, and then I'm a colored person, a mixed race person. So I never see it as in fact, I don't even know how I look half of the time, because I don't see myself in terms of how I physically look. I'm always seeing myself as I know whose I am. So therefore I know who I am. So I think that's always been there since I was a young child. And then when I went back to the area that I grew up in, it's funny because when I was meant to do my internship, they sent me to the white part, the black part, the brown part, all of them. And every day of the week I would go to a different part. And when I went back to my own township that I grew up in, that was the same place where I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt the most uncomfortable more than any other place. And I thought, but why do I feel so uncomfortable working in the same field that I wanted to make a difference? And it's because I felt guilty that I got out of the township. I felt a sense of, man, I got to really go and do something with my life and not have a baby as a 16-year-old girl because that was happening in wherever I looked. And so there was a sense of, I don't fit in here, but I know I'm not white, I know I'm not black. So where do I fit in? And I think that I had a problem with for a while, up until about 30 years old, about what does it actually mean to have left the township more than the color of our skin. What does it mean? And is there a sense of guilt that I've left? And even being here for the last 15 years, it's like, have I left the problems back home? And now there's still a sense of guilt. What can I do to give back? And I think that's also got to do with class, and I think it's got to do with having moved past the issues and the problems, and not having to think about load shedding and poverty and the next plate of food that some of my family still has to think about. So I think there's layer upon layer as we talk about this topic. I think I'm beginning to unpack a lot more of myself, which I hadn't thought of.